he became one of the most famous faces in European cinema by accident. At age 38, because another man broke his foot the day before filming started, his real name was Carlo Pedersoli, and before anyone on earth knew him as Bud Spencer, he had already been an Olympic swimmer, a law graduate, a road builder in the Venezuelan jungle, and a songwriter for RCA Records. Acting was roughly his fifth career, not even close to his most interesting one. October 31st, 1929. Carlo Pedersoli was born into the Santa Lucia neighborhood of Naples, into a family that owned a factory their ancestors had built sometime in the 19th century. Money wasn't something they worried about. Then the Second World War landed directly on top of them. Naples ranked among the most heavily bombed cities in all of Italy, and a direct hit erased the Pedersoli factory overnight. Everything built across generations gone in a single raid. The family relocated to Rome, reasoning that the Vatican's presence offered some protection. And to keep food on the table during the war years, they sold the linens from the family trousseau piece by piece until there was nothing left to sell. Carlo was 10 when the war started, 15 when it ended. He had joined a swimming club at age 7, and by 15 he was already beating full-grown adults in competition. His school rugby team had won a national championship, and somewhere in between he took up boxing and claimed he never lost a single fight. The war stripped his family of everything they had, but it also produced something out of that boy, a young man who would grow to nearly 2 meters tall and could walk into almost any sport and own it within a season. The one he chose first would make history. September 19, 1950, a pool in Salsomaggiore, northern Italy. Carlo Pedersoli, 20 years old, touched the wall in 59.5 seconds in the 100-meter freestyle, becoming the first Italian in history to break the 1-minute barrier. Both the Italian Swimming Federation and the IOC's own records confirm it. Helsinki came next. The 1952 Olympics, semifinals in the 100-meter freestyle. 4 years later, he returned from Melbourne and reached the semifinals again. Between those two games, he collected 14 national titles, moved into water polo, won the 1954 Italian Championship with SS Lazio, and took gold with the national team at the 1955 Mediterranean Games in Barcelona, 50 years after his last competitive race. The Italian Swimming Federation gave him their highest honor, the Camano d'Oro, the Golden Cayman, in 2005. His son Giuseppe said it plainly years later. The Olympics was probably the happiest stretch of his father's entire life. And then, with all of that behind him, Carlo Pedersoli went to Venezuela to build roads. Competitive swimming ended in 1957, when Pedersoli was 27, and what he carried out of sport was already unusual. A law degree from Sapienza University of Rome, 6 languages, Italian, Portuguese, Spanish, German, English, French picked up across a life that had already included living in Brazil after his family emigrated there in 1947, where he fell deep into Brazilian music and never really climbed back out. None of that felt like enough. So he moved to Venezuela for 3 years and worked as a construction foreman on a section of the Pan American Highway. Then took a job with Alfa Romeo in Caracas, and when people asked him why he'd done any of it, his answer was short. He wanted to find out whether he was a brave man or a coward. Back in Italy, by the early 1960s, through his father-in-law film producer, Giuseppe Amato, whose credits ran all the way to Fellini's La Dolce Vita, Pedersoli signed with RCA Records and spent several years writing and producing Neapolitan folk and pop songs, putting lyrics together for established Italian singers, and fronting a band called Glee in a Satanati del Ritmo, the Rhythmaniacs, through the nightclubs along Rome's Via Veneto. During those years, a young man came in to audition with songs Pedersoli decided were terrible, and he turned him away. That young man was Domenico Modugno. He went on to record Volare, one of the most recognizable Italian songs ever written. Carlo Pedersoli rejected the man who wrote Volare, then went back to his own work without losing much sleep over it. After his father-in-law died in 1964, he shifted to producing documentaries for RAI, Italy's national television network, which brought the full list to Olympic swimmer, law graduate, road builder, songwriter, television producer, and still no actor anywhere in sight. That changed because of a broken bone. Director Giuseppe Calizzi needed someone physically imposing for a 1967 spaghetti western. Someone pointed him to Ward, the enormous retired songwriter, and Pedersoli took the job at 38 as what he fully expected to be a one-time thing. The industry required an English-sounding stage name. The entire spaghetti western world ran on Americanized pseudonyms, and the name he landed on came from two sources he didn't overthink. Bud, from his favorite beer, Budweiser, and Spencer, from his favorite actor, Spencer Tracy. God Forgives, I Don't opened in 19... The day before filming began, the actor cast opposite Spencer, a man named Peter Martell, broke his foot. A replacement was needed fast, and the name that came up was Mario Girodi, a young actor recently operating under an English stage name of his own, Terence Hill. What makes this stranger is that both Spencer and Hill had already appeared as uncredited extras in the same 1959 film, Hannibal, without ever crossing paths. And now a broken bone threw them together with no rehearsal and no time to figure out if it would work. It worked immediately. Hill moved fast, nimble and blue-eyed, and loose, while Spencer came through scenes enormous and grumpy and bear-like, and the contrast between them was so complete it barely needed writing around it. Hill said later that everything felt instinctive, that scenes which normally burned through multiple takes just landed on the first try. Spencer offered his usual shrug as explanation. Since he had never studied acting, he told people he was more instinctive. Enzo Barboni cast him in a low-budget comedy western in 1970. They Call Me Trinity. Spencer played Bambino, a hulking, permanently annoyed horse thief who communicated mostly through grunts, open-handed slaps, and industrial quantities of beans. Nobody predicted what happened next. The film became the highest-grossing Italian production of its era, clearing Fellini's La Dolce Vita at the Italian box office on a modest budget with two men who had stumbled into the whole thing sideways. Trinity is Still My Name. The 1971 sequel sold around 14.5 million tickets in Italy alone. Germany moved over 12 million tickets, landing it as the seventh most successful film in German box office history at the time, and worldwide earnings cleared $30 million. The film remains among the top 5 most attended Italian productions ever made. What separated them from everything else in the genre was tone. Sergio Leone had built spaghetti westerns on operatic violence, Clint Eastwood squinting through Gunsmoke, Ennio Morricone scores building towards something close to apocalyptic. Spencer and Hill threw all of that out and replaced it with slapstick. Nobody died in their films. Nobody bled. Spencer's signature move, an open palm slap across the face followed by a hammer fist to the top of the skull, became so recognizable across Europe that a video game was literally named after it, and 3 generations of families sat down and watched these things together on a Saturday afternoon. Over the decades that followed, they appeared in 17 or 18 films together. Sources differ on the exact count and their final collaboration. Troublemakers arrived in 1994, nearly 50 years of working together and not one argument between them. Off-camera, they were 2 enormous, shy men who barely knew how to be around each other, and Giuseppe estimated they shared a dinner table outside of work maybe 3 times across their entire lives. On camera, something shifted. A chemistry appeared from nowhere and vanished the moment the director called. Cut. Neither man ever explained it or found it again with anyone else. One detail that catches almost everyone off guard: Spencer was extremely nearsighted, wore thick glasses every day, removed them before every single take, and could barely make out what was in front of him during those legendary brawls. He refused to stunt double anyway. Staying still was apparently not something Carlo Pedersoli knew how to do, because after a 1972 film where he and Hill played bush pilots in Colombia, he went out and earned his commercial airline pilot's license, then his helicopter license. Over 2,000 hours in fixed-wing aircraft followed, along with 500 hours in helicopters. And for more than 35 years, he called flying the biggest passion of his life, bigger than swimming, bigger than the movies. October 29, 1981, Mistral Air was founded. Operations launched in 1984 as an airmail service, expanded into passenger flights, and secured contracts with the Vatican to carry Catholic pilgrims to Lourdes, Fatima, Santiago de Compostela, Israel, Poland, and Mexico. Acquisitions eventually pulled the company into post-Italian Italy's National Postal Service, and by 2019 it had been rebranded as Post Air Cargo. The airline Bud Spencer founded still runs today. It delivers Italy's mail. 12 patents sit alongside that on his list: a walking stick with a built-in folding table and chair, a disposable toothbrush with integrated toothpaste, and an early concept for a battery-powered car whose prototype turned out too heavy to work. Years later, watching Tesla and other electric vehicles take over roads around the world, he noted with quiet satisfaction that the idea itself had been right. During a film shoot in Atlanta, he bought an airstrip on impulse, a 2-kilometer dirt road with a windsock and an office, and 2 FBI agents. Showed up almost immediately on suspicion of drug trafficking. Germany deserves its own conversation when it comes to what Bud Spencer meant to people. When German voice actors dubbed the films, they didn't translate the dialogue so much as rebuild it, adding jokes and wordplay that made the German versions considerably funnier than the Italian originals. The result being that German audiences fell for a version of Spencer that was, in some ways, a character all its own. The word Budenzorn entered German slang, describing the act of beating up a group of people in a superior and somehow comic fashion. When SEHW Bish GMND held a public vote on naming a new tunnel, Bud Spencer Tunnel, won outright. The city council compromised by naming their public swimming pool the Bud Spencer Bad in 2011, and Spencer attended the ceremony in person at the same venue where he had won a swimming competition 60 years before. A museum dedicated to him opened on Unter den Linden in Berlin in 2021-500. Square meters of memorabilia from the Pedersoli family's private collection. Fan festivals across Germany grew from 150 attendees to 4,000 by 2019. Budapest unveiled a bronze statue in 2017, and Hungarian fans offered a simple explanation for why the films had carried special weight during the communist era. When they were among the few Western productions the authorities allowed through, Spencer and Hill always fought for the little people against the people in charge. Across France, Greece, the Netherlands, Eastern Europe, and all of South America, household names, in the United States, virtually unknown. This appeared to bother Carlo Pedersoli not at all. Rome, June 27, 2016. Carlo Pedersoli died at 86, and his last word was grazie. Terence Hill heard the news while standing in Almeria, Spain, the exact location where the two men had first met 49 years before, and what he said afterward was this: "After the sorrow and the pain came a great calm, because he realized that nothing happens by chance." The funeral took place at Rome's Church of the Artists, and as the coffin was carried out, the crowd spontaneously started singing the theme from Watch Out, We're Mad. Giuseppe described his father as the least strict person in the world, a man who struck his son once in his entire life, a single slap on the leg, and who carried what Giuseppe called an almost childlike imagination straight through to the end. Traveling always meant packing spaghetti, olive oil, and tomatoes. Once, he topped pasta with cornflakes. He handed his son a pen that writes upside down and explained with complete seriousness that astronauts use it, by every account of everyone who knew him, one of the gentlest men who ever lived. A boy whose family lost everything in the bombing of Naples, the first Italian to break a minute in the 100-meter freestyle, a law graduate who spoke 6 languages, spent 3 years building roads in Venezuela to test his own courage, and turned away Domenico Modugno before sending him back out into the world to write a man who stumbled into acting at 38 because a stranger's foot broke at the wrong moment, picked a name off a beer label in a film credit, and became one of the most beloved faces on an entire continent without quite meaning to. He founded an airline that still runs today, 12 patents, 2,000 hours in the air, an airstrip bought on impulse, an FBI visit, a political campaign, a lost election, and 2 kilos of pasta in a single sitting. His name was Carlo Pedersoli. Most of the world knew him as Bud Spencer. And if you grew up anywhere in Europe or South America between 1970 and 1990, you're already smiling.